You're listening to the Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast. Today we're going to be talking all about trust. Are you a Catholic wife grappling with challenging in-laws? The Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast is your sanctuary for navigating the sometimes stormy seas of life with in-laws while being validated for what you've experienced. Join me, your host, Miriam Susan, a Catholic wife who's weathered nearly 3 decades of in-law drama, as we tackle the tough issues you're dealing with head on. Hi, Miriam Susan here, and today's episode is going to be all about trust. Now, one of the issues that you probably have with your in-laws is that you don't trust them. And sometimes that lack of trust is based on actual issues. There's actually been breaches of trust that you can point to and say, I don't trust this person. But sometimes your lack of trust is just an instinct. It's just a kind of spidey sense situation where you've seen some things and you can't quite put your finger on it, but you don't trust them. So how do you move forward in a relationship like this? It's very, very difficult. It's very difficult to have any kind of relationship with anybody if there is a lack of trust. And a lot of times our husbands want to know what can be done to improve the relationship that you have with his family. And he wants specifics. Is it that you want them to do certain things? Is that you want them to behave in certain ways, give you certain things, not give you certain things, and so on. And really what it boils down to is a lack of trust. So how do you go from not trusting your in-laws to trusting them? Well, first, they have to show that they can be trustworthy. So how do you know if somebody is trustworthy? Well, they say what they mean. They do what they say. They are kind, compassionate, love you unconditionally. Those are things that build trust. If they have done you wrong in the past, a way to rebuild that trust is for them to apologize. And it has to be a sincere apology. It has to name what it was, say that they're sorry, and say that they are going to make every attempt to not do it again. So for example, if your in-laws undermined your authority in front of your children, let's say they contradicted you after you had told your child one thing. So let's take eating, for example. If your child was asking for a certain snack, but they hadn't had dinner yet, your in-laws could step in and say, well, don't tell mommy, but I'll give you a lollipop. Or don't tell mommy, but I'll give you some ice cream when she's not looking. That's a huge breach of trust because they're not only dishonoring you as the parent of your child, but they're also trying to drive a wedge between you and your child and trying to make themselves look like this amazing person who maybe loves your child more than you do. So to address a situation like that, to rebuild that trust, your in-laws would need to come out and say, I'm very sorry that I said that to your child. I should not have done that. That was not appropriate for me. I know you're the mom. I know you're the dad. I know that your rules need to come first. And I'm very sorry, and I will do my best to never do that again. That's when you can start to rebuild trust, but that's only the very first step. Because after that happens, it's not fixed. The solution is not all wrapped up. That's just the very first step. And so the way you know that they were actually repentant, they actually meant what they said, that you can trust what they said, is that the next time they see your child in a similar situation, they don't undermine you again. They don't say, well, I'm not supposed to tell you, but I'll give you some ice cream in just a minute. It can't be anything like that. There has to be a total end to whatever the behavior was that broke your trust. There has to be an apology, but there has to be a change in the behavior, and it has to be sustained. Most toxic people, they can behave for bursts of time, generally short bursts of time. But as time goes on, and there's more time between one incident and the present, the longer that span of time is, the more likely that toxic behavior is to come back out again. And this is if they are truly toxic. Now, we all have in-laws who are 100% human, right? And so they make mistakes just like we do. So there is an opportunity for us to extend grace. And grace can be very easily given when you trust somebody. But when your trust is broken over and over and over again, our willingness to extend that grace, it really diminishes. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not forgiving. Forgiveness is a whole nother topic, and I'm not really going to dive into that today. But we can absolutely forgive someone for wronging us, and sometimes with our in-laws, we have to forgive over and over and over and over and over and over and over. But we don't necessarily need to get hurt all those times. We don't need to step back into the line of fire, put our children back into the line of fire when we've been hurt. It doesn't mean we aren't forgiving them, but we're not going to necessarily reconcile because the trust has been shattered. And so if you're facing a situation where your husband really wants you to spend more time with his parents, with his family, and you're not ready, it might be due to a lack of trust. Now, I'm not saying this to plant any ideas into your head, to plant the idea that you don't trust your in-laws, because chances are there's something that's already happened that brought you to my podcast to where your trust has been at least chipped away a bit. And sometimes these things can be very, very subtle. It can be you and your in-laws remembering an incident in a very, very different way. And with toxic people, usually those differences in memories paints you to be the bad guy and them to be the good guy or the victim. And so keep that in mind if you're rehashing things that have happened in the past, not to necessarily hold it against your in-laws, but just to observe patterns. Please go back and find the episode that talks about our toxic in-laws' behavior and how they act. I think it was one of the very first episodes, definitely in the top, number 1 through 10. And find that episode and listen to it, because I go further into depth into how you can really tell the difference between someone who's just human and just makes mistakes like all of us do versus someone who's truly toxic. And toxic people tend to do things on purpose to hurt you, or do things on purpose to damage your reputation, or do things on purpose to drive a wedge between you and your husband or you and your children. And all of those things break trust. Trust is a foundation of our faith. We trust in the Lord with all our hearts. We trust in the teachings of the church. We trust in sacred scripture. Trust is really the foundation not only of our Catholic faith, but of our marriages and our relationships with our children. And if that trust is broken at any point, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. It's like if you find a crack in the foundation of your home, a lot of people who want to just cover it up, that's what they'll do, is they just cover it up, but the crack is still there. And until that crack is addressed, the whole entire structure of the home is in jeopardy. The integrity of the home is at risk because it's not on a solid foundation. So if you find yourself in this place where you just don't trust your in-laws, and maybe you don't have the words for it, but you just don't trust them, I understand. There's so many things that happened in the years, the decades, nearly 3 decades that I've been married to my husband, and the time before we got married, we were engaged and just dating. There were a lot of things that broke my trust, and I just ignored them. I didn't give them much validity because they seemed to be so minor, but yet they were an indication of a pattern of behavior that was highly toxic, very manipulative, very deceptive, and very controlling. And if I pointed out some of these situations to my husband, he would not really think much of it because that was the environment in which he was raised. That there were always little slights, always little jabs, always little things that would break somebody's trust. But because they were his parents, it's an innate desire for us to trust our parents. That's how God designed it. If we can't trust our parents, then who do we trust as small children? They're the ones that are supposed to house us, give us shelter, provide food and water, and bathe us, and clothe us, and protect us. And that's a really hard way to grow up when you have these conflicting situations. And so if your husband grew up in a situation like that, please be patient with him. Extend him the grace, because he might not see it. He might not see things the same way you do if you didn't grow up in that same situation. Just like it's so much easier for us to see the sins of our children, of our husbands, of our friends, of our parents, of anybody else than it is our own, our husbands will have a hard time recognizing anything that's normal and is consistent with the pattern in which he was raised. It's going to be very hard for him to see that there's anything wrong with it. So if you point out things that have broken your trust with your in-laws, don't be surprised if he doesn't see it. Don't be surprised if he thinks it's not a big deal. If he thinks it's just a little friendly competition. Oh, she's just being silly. Oh, she's just kidding. Oh, he's not being serious. That's just how he is. That's just how he jokes. That's just how he plays. But I think the Holy Spirit at times gives us to our husbands to help break that legacy of a lack of trust. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. But when we are the outsiders and we can see what's not right in a situation, it might be that God has put us in this situation to break this legacy, to create a new legacy for our husbands and for his family. Please know that I am praying for you, and I understand where you are. I understand how hard it is to have married into a family where trust isn't genuine, trust isn't real, and oftentimes we're forced to just pretend like it's okay and just ignore it and act like nothing happened when things do happen. So know that I'm praying for you. Know that you're not alone. My goodness, it has made such a difference in my life to know that there are other women who understand what I'm going through. And I hope that that brings you some consolation to know that you're not the only one who's dealing with crazy. You're not the only one dealing with toxicity. And you're not the only one who deeply loves her husband and really cannot stand his family. Know that I'm praying for you. Please pray for me. I really covet your prayers as I try to speak out on these issues that our enemy doesn't want me to talk about. So I appreciate your prayers as I try to bring you an episode every week to encourage you and let you know that you're not alone. God bless you. Go in peace. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast. I have a free gift for you that I would love for you to get. It is my free scripts for toxic in-laws. It's a little PDF that you can use to give you some examples of how to speak to your in-laws about certain issues. I'd love to give it to you absolutely free. So if you head to desiringpeace.com/gift, it will be there waiting for you. Just enter your name and email so you can start using it for inspiration on how to talk with your toxic in-laws. Again, thanks so much for tuning in. Go to desiringpeace.com/gift to claim your gift now. Disclaimer. All content and information on this podcast and our website, including our programs, products, and/or services, is for information and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional medical, psychiatric, or mental health advice of any kind, and does not establish any kind of professional client relationship by your listening to this podcast or use of my website. A professional client relationship with you is only formed after we have expressly entered into a written agreement with you that you have signed, including our fee structure and other terms to work with you in a specific matter. Although we strive to provide accurate general information, the information presented here is not a substitute for any kind of professional advice, and you should not rely solely on this information. Always consult a professional in the area for your particular needs and circumstances prior to making any professional, medical, or mental health related decisions.